Hey there, my name's Gray Jones, and I'm the host of the TV Writer Podcast, partner of Script Magazine, found at tvwriterpodcast.com, and also these video tips. Well, today we're going to be focusing on, focus, the Okii.net USB Focus Controller, or FC1, and also the Okii Mini Controller, the MC1, and these are for Canon DSLR cameras. First, we're going to look at the FC1 Focus Controller, which you see on the left here next to a SmallHD DP6 screen, and this is hooked up to a Canon 60D camera. And what does this do? This lets you change the focus. It lets you immediately jump to different focus points for racking focus and control many other functions in the camera, as we're going to see. First, I'm going to turn on the DP6, going to turn on the Okii controller, turn on the 60D, and you'll see we've got to enable live view mode, which we can do by holding down this upper button here. One of the things I love about the Okii is that it's got every single function labeled on the front. So what are some of the things we can do? I'm going to switch to an info mode so that we can see. You can hit the top and bottom buttons on the right. This takes us into settings mode, and this shows in a blue indicator at the top where we can change the ISO. Look at the ISO numbers jumping up and down on the bottom right of the SmallHD screen. We can also change the aperture. You'll see on the bottom left here, the aperture number changing. We can hit the third button, and that lets us change the shutter speed. And then at the bottom, you can also change exposure compensation as well. If we hit the top and bottom buttons again, you see the indicator light change to a pinky purple, and that lets us change the focus zone. You'll notice it jumps when we first set it. That's because the focus zone in the Okii controller is a different focus zone than the camera, so make sure that you use one or the other. So after we change that focus zone to where we like it, we can jump back out into focus mode. We see the green indicator on the top. We can switch the camera to a mode that lets us show the full image, and see how I turn this dial in the center and it changes where the camera is focused. The first thing we want to do is set the near stop and the far stop, or infinity point. And these should be set even if you don't think you'll need them. The reason is, and we'll discover a little bit more about the Canon USB protocol in a bit, but basically the Canon USB protocol sends messages to the lens but does not receive messages back from the lens. And so it says, keep focusing, keep focusing, keep focusing, keep focusing. And so if it sends too many messages past the infinity point, one thing is that that can actually wear the autofocus motor. The other thing is that, say it sends 10 messages forward, then it thinks it has to come 10 back, and that might actually make it go past the point that it needs. So suffice it to say, set the near stop and far stop. So to set the near stop, I'm going to go to the nearest point that I could possibly want to go, obviously not past the minimum focus distance of your lens. And then I'm just going to hold down the near stop, and you'll see the button at the top blink. Then I'm going to go to the actual object that I want to focus on in the near point, and then set my far focus rack point, if you want to call it that, and then go to what I would consider infinity in this scene, which is not actually infinity, and set that far stop. So now we actually have 4 focus points set. I'm going to engage the recording with the button at the bottom, and let's have some fun. So I'm going to push my far focus point, and then I'm going to push my near focus point. Hey, let's go all the way to infinity. And let's go all the way to the near stop. You're going to have a lot of fun with this. Something that I would mention is that you will notice a little bit of stair-stepping, and that is a limitation of the Canon protocol. You see it jump a little bit as it goes from one point to the other. And this will be more or less depending on which lens you're using. Some lenses will jump further with each step. Some will jump less. You'll also notice that on some noisier lenses, you're going to hear that stepping in the autofocus motor. If you're recording sound in a quiet environment, you might hear this. I would recommend that you use Canon lenses where possible. They seem to be quieter and more suited to this. It will work with other lenses. I've tried it on a Sigma macro lens, and I've heard of it being used on other brands as well. But your experience may vary. They may not be quite as well suited to this type of control. Also, it should be noted that if you change the focal length, in other words, change the zoom on a zoom lens, this may change the focus points and also how far the steps travel. So basically what you do, once you've zoomed to the shot that you want, then set your focus points and go from there, and don't zoom within the shot and expect those preset points to work. We can, of course, stop the recording. If you hold down the red button at the bottom, you can engage a still capture, which also works in the non-movie modes. And really neat, you can also use these buttons on the left as more of a camcorder style changing of the focus, which may be easier if it's mounted on a tripod, for instance, and you have to control it with your thumb or your fingers rather than having that motion around the rotary control. You can also push the bottom left button when you're not in record mode. A quick push will give you a zoom. And if you hold it down, again, not in record mode, this will engage autofocus. Now, an important note about autofocus is once you've engaged that and the auto metering, it will skew all of your focus points. So make sure you do this before you set your focus points, or else you're going to have to clear them and set them again. And at the top left, you'll notice a step button. And what this does is it changes the intervals that you're stepping. There's a big step mode that is useful for just jumping very quickly between focuses, but you can't really fine tune very well with that mode. And it's also definitely not smooth. There's a very, very small step mode, which is useful for getting fine focus points, but it is really, really slow. And if you did want the smoothest focus change, that is the way to do it. But for most practical purposes, I've found that the medium step mode is the most useful. So what would you use the Okii FC1 focus controller for? Well, if you have the camera at the end of a jib, crane, or even a tall tripod where it's tough to access the controls, this controller is indispensable. It is very important to note that, as you've seen in this video, there is stair stepping in the autofocus motor. I do need to clarify again that this is not a problem with the Okii controller. It relates back to limitations of the Canon USB protocol, which will affect any brand of USB controller. The Canon protocol functions by sending a series of jump messages to the autofocus motor. It does not pull the focus in a totally smooth manner and cannot gradually change the speed of the focus pull. You have those three stair-stepping amounts. You can go big jumps, medium jumps, or small jumps, but they are jumps. Now, for many purposes and with many lenses, this may be within tolerable parameters. However, if you're recording audio in a very quiet location and you don't have a quiet lens, say for instance a non-Canon lens, or if you need a very smooth focus pull, this may not be for you. In that case, you would have to go with a physical rack focus device. There are many on the market with a great range of different prices. That said, it is an incredibly useful unit. As a matter of fact, even indispensable for situations where you're not close to the camera. I've even been shooting at the zoo where I have to put the camera up way up high over a fence. And it's like, well, what do you do if you need to adjust the ISO or adjust the focus when it's way up high? With this, you can do that. It's very well built. It feels solid with easy to read labels, which makes a difference as compared to some of the other ones on the market. There's a perfect amount of resistance to the center knob. You'll find you need some way of mounting it in your setup if you're not going to actually hold it in your hand, but there's a standard 1/4 20 threaded mounting hole on the back, so it's not too hard. In this setup, I'm using an articulating arm I got from jag35.com. There's lots of other options out there that you could use. Okay, and now we're looking at the Okii mini controller, the MC1. This is brand new, and this is a much simpler controller. It does not have focus, but for many applications, this is very, very handy. Say, for instance, with a shoulder rig where you might have a physical follow focus with your left thumb, but you still need to have one hand holding the rig at all times. You can have this controller so that you can enable the ISO, aperture, shutter, zoom, etc., all with the other finger. You notice there are 4 simple buttons on the left. The bottom one is the power and mode switch. You'll see a green light change to a blue light, change to a pinky purple, and back again, and that's how you know which mode is set. And it's super, super simple. The green mode is the ISO change mode. So you just enable that green mode, and up and down makes the ISO go, guess what? Up and down. You see it on the SmallHD screen here going up and down. Very easy. You change the mode with one simple press to the bottom, and that gets you into aperture mode. You can go again, you guessed it, up and down to change the aperture. And you see where I'm going here. Another hit gets you to the purple mode, and that lets you change the shutter speed up and down. Now here's where it gets a little bit different. One more press gets you into aqua mode. Ooh, that sounds exciting. Up presses give you the zoom mode. Holding it down gives you an autofocus and metering. Holding down the bottom button enables or disables live view mode. And then at any time, the top button starts and stops the video. Very, very handy. And holding it down enables image capture, whether you're in movie mode or not. So, very, very simple device. Incredibly handy and quite reasonable. One other incredibly useful feature about the MC1, Canon DSLR cameras are limited to recording 12 minutes at a time or 4 gigabytes at a time. The Okii MC1 mini controller has a repeat function where it will automatically stop and quickly restart the recording every 11 minutes. If you're recording events, this could be the deal maker right there. I've heard that this feature may be coming to the Okii FC1 focus controller as well. This would be a firmware update, and you would need to send it in to Okii to get this done, but it's encouraging to know that they are continually working on developing their products. Watch their website at okii.net, that's okii.net, for details about this and also more information about these great products. Just like the FC1, the MC1 uses standard 1/4-20 threaded mounting holes. There are 3 of them on this one, on the back, on the front, and the top. And that's very, very handy for flexibility. I should mention that Okii, SmallHD, and Jag35 are sponsors of the podcasts that I do. That said, this is a fair review of their products. The Okii FC1 focus controller and MC1 mini controller, as well as the SmallHD DP6 monitor that I used in the demo, are highly recommended. Keep in mind that there are caveats about the Canon USB protocol, and do make sure that your camera is on the supported list at okii.net, as well as that you have at least a good percentage of Canon lenses that you can use. Thanks for watching. I'm Gray Jones with video tips for the TV Writer Podcast. You can check out more on my YouTube channel. Just search for Graham A. Jones or at tvwriterpodcast.com. See you next time. Bye-bye.